Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Daniel Moyer. I'm a sales support trainer here at Briggs Stratton Energy Solutions. With me today is Nathan Heston. Hello, Nathan.
Good morning, Daniel. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you around the country, around the world. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, so today what we have for you is the future of solar batteries and the grid, NEM 3.0. Now, this talk is specific to NEM 3.0, which is here in California. But what we're seeing across the country is other jurisdictions, other utilities, other state, CPUCs equivalents are starting to look at what California is doing and maybe copying them or adopting their own version of what California is doing. So this topic is very important for all of us in the solar industry, and there's been a lot of detrimental impacts to the solar installation companies here in California because of these new net energy metering policies that have come down. So we're going to talk about what they are, what changed, what happened, a little bit of why they changed and what led to these changes. Talk a little bit briefly about the company history, briefly about our products, and then also in the talk with a little bit of our invitation to join our installer program. So really the meat of it is going to be about the future of solar batteries and what it's going to look like in this new kind of paradigm. This is a NAPCEP accredited course. So at the end of this talk, our email is going to pop up. You're going to go ahead and email our email box with your full name. Please spell out your full first name and last name so we know the appropriate name to put on your NAPCEP credit continuing education certificate that we'll issue to you. Another housekeeping item is we do have a Q&A chat feature. Well, it's a Q&A, not the chat. So it usually appears at the bottom or the top of your screen. Please put in questions. This topic is definitely something that's very interesting, and I want you guys to be interactive on this, and please put in questions. Couple exciting upcoming events is RE Plus Texas. Now, there's always been the big RE Plus show, whether it's in Vegas or Anaheim, but there are these regional shows. So we are going to be there down in Texas, May 14th and 15th at the Convention Center. I did notice that there is still advanced registration pricing available through April 22nd. So there's a QR code on your screen. Go ahead and get your phone out and scan that QR code, and that's going to take you to the registration page. Again, if you register by April 22nd, there's advanced registration pricing. That's a little bit less than the full price. You can apply for just the expo. Come walk the floor. You can additionally apply for the larger conference where you get to join a lot of the other talks. Another exciting event that comes up is the Midwest Renewable Energy Association, or we call it the MREA Fair. And this is going to be in Custer,
Daniel, just quick
Wisconsin.
question.
Yeah.
Back on the previous slide. So for RE Plus down there in Texas, we're going to have displays, right? We're going to have the new battery on display there as well.
That's right. We're going to be featuring our new 6.6 stacking battery, and we have some slides coming up a little bit additionally, kind of diving a little bit deeper into that.
Okay, note the booth 313 there. So thanks, Daniel. I wanted to make sure. And of course, SolarArc being down there in Texas, one of our partners, we're very excited. We'll be displaying their 15K inverter as well, I believe.
Yeah, exciting. And these shows are a little bit smaller, but they're still great events, and it prevents you from having to travel from halfway across the country to get to some of these events. So this isn't the only RE kind of local event we're doing. We're doing them throughout the year. So if you see one in your area, you can almost be sure that we'll be there with you. MREA, this one reminds me a lot of the old Soul Fest that was held at Real Goods up in Hopland. This is kind of one of those old school solar shows, right? And you can see it there. It's part trade show, part educational event, and part grassroots festival. So there's music. It's an outdoor facility. So if you're going to be in Custer, Wisconsin, which is not too far from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, which is where Briggs Stratton is headquartered, come out and visit us. I'll be giving a talk there. We'll have an outdoor booth. So bring the shorts. This is a perfectly applicable event to wear shorts, and bring the sunscreen because it will be in June. Hope to see you there. That QR code on the screen brings you to the registration event for that. Really quickly, there's going to be two events, a new industry demo day on Friday, but the actual energy fair is going to be on Saturday. So if you're going to join one, I would suggest you come on the Saturday as well. So kind of diving into the topic of net energy metering 3.0, really what it kind of comes down to is in California, you can no longer just put photovoltaics, grid-tied photovoltaics on a home in California and expect to see a financial return on that. By the time you get your money back, the equipment is probably going to have aged out. So one way to increase your return on investment is to add storage. So if it no longer makes sense to export power to the grid, energy to the grid during the day, because you're not getting that one-to-one credit anymore, you're getting pennies on the dollar, pittance. What do you need to do? You need to store it in energy storage batteries on the home. And
And
one way,
we're gonna
yeah,
get into the details
yeah,
of this, right? And we're going to talk about things like round trip efficiencies, and this leads to the question of why you should DC couple instead of AC coupling solar. And so that's the point of this talk, is to get you the details, make sure that you understand what these changes are that NEM 3.0 is initiating in California, but also for those of you around the country to prepare you for the fact that, you know, many of these changes might come your direction as
yeah,
well.
yeah, absolutely. And what do these changes mean is that batteries, and what batteries need to do is be efficient, be long lasting, and be safe. So Nathan, could you kind of run through some of the different chemistries we have here? We're using lithium iron phosphate, which I know is very popular in the industry now, and it's where a lot of people are going. I'd like to remind everyone, Simplified Power historically has always leveraged that type of chemistry from the very beginning. So as we're calling upon batteries to cycle every day now, Nathan, please walk us through some of these different chemistries and the properties that make them advantageous.
Yeah, sure. And we won't spend a lot of time on this. I will point out, you know, as Daniel said, you know, back in 2010, when Simplify started making these batteries, we were using lithium iron phosphate specifically because of its safety. Now, there are other chemistries, and NMC historically has been a more popular go-to battery for Tesla, partly because the automotive industry needed a higher energy density. Lithium cobalt oxide has commonly been used in hand tools, NCA batteries as well. One of the challenges with the cobalt-based chemistries is recyclability, recoverability. You know that cobalt is a toxic transition metal, so it does make it a little bit harder to recycle. It does make it lighter; it's more energy dense, and there is a place for things like NMC. Now, it's worth mentioning that both Rivian and Tesla have switched to LFP chemistries, and we have other automotive industries which are simply switching to LFP. And the reason for that is increased number of cycles, increased lifetime. For homeowners that are going to be putting these batteries in a stationary position, energy density, having a lighter battery that has the, you know, a greater overall amount of energy per mass is not that important. If it's a stationary battery, we don't care. Now, that being said, there are plenty of times where having a battery that is mobile, you really do care about the weight. And I do want to point out that Briggs and Stratton also has a whole lineup of batteries for things like lawnmowers, forklifts, you know, mobile lighting stations. Tool rental is very common, and that's our Vanguard lineup. That we also manufacture. So yeah, there is a place for them, but for home battery storage, for both for the lifetime and for the safety reasons, we think that LFP is the only chemistry that should be chosen. And this is evidenced by the number of cycles we can get out of these batteries. So this is not a chemistry talk, but that is why you should be using LFP battery chemistries. We do note that many of our competitors have also switched to LFP, but we've got a real long history with it, and that's why we can offer a 10,000 cycle, 15-year warranty. Right? We really expect incredible lifetimes out of our batteries.
Yeah, and just to be clear, that 15-year warranty on the Amplify and Simplify batteries, a 10-year warranty on our Phi and our 6.6 batteries is unlimited cycles, 100% depth of discharge, and no throughput limitation clause. So it's really a flat rate warranty there to support you in the industry installing these products.
And we
Uh,
guarantee a capacity at the end of that warranty, right? If you lose that capacity before the warranty. So we have those guarantees there. And Daniel, thanks for being very clear on the warranty.
Yeah, and in that, I think a lot of ways is similar. We can kind of understand it in photovoltaic modules that at the end of a certain time frame, whether it be 15, 20 years, the panel is going to be able to produce a certain percent of its rated output. Take a look also at your batteries because that's an indication of a good, strong battery or maybe not one. This slide here, what I really just want to kind of talk about is why we had done storage in the past, right? Historically, we've always done batteries to provide backup power when the grid goes down. And really, and of course, off grid and being able to optimize a generator, right? We make generators as well as here at Briggs Stratton Energy Solutions. And idea that you can run a generator, charge batteries, and then shut the generator off. But really, this talk and what we're going to get into here in a second is utility bill savings. Now, we've always kind of had that a lot of times with time of use where we can charge the battery during the day and discharge it during certain times in the evening. But now what we're trying to do is really discharge the battery the entire night or until the sun comes up again, where the photovoltaics can start providing power to the home's loads and taking over that battery charging. That's really the key of this is now energy storage systems are not only giving you backup, not only giving you off grid, but for people that are grid tied, allow you to see that financial return on your battery system. So really quickly, I just want to talk, and maybe Nathan could jump in here. What I'm showing here is a DC couple system. And what I mean by that is solar photovoltaic modules produce DC current. That DC is then fed directly into batteries through charge controllers. Only when we need to use AC loads do we change the DC in the batteries to AC. So that allows us to be more efficient. We, of course, can take in generator, which would feed AC into the inverter and then charge up the batteries. Of course, here's the grid, which is what we're going to try to use the least, right? We're going to try to be grid independent in a lot of ways. Nathan, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. And I think I will jump in. I think that, again, what we're trying to discuss here today is those double arrows going back and forth between the inverter and the grid. And that's where the dollar signs come in. Now, of course, this is not the only way to do battery energy storage. In fact, competitors like Enphase will put solar on your roof, but put micro inverters. So yes, all solar panels produce DC power, but we could put an array on your roof with individual inverters on the back of those panels. So those are microinverters. The challenge with that is every time you transform energy from one form to another, you end up generating some heat. And doing it with microinverters and then having to go back to DC. So you change at the panel level from DC to AC, and then to charge your battery, having to go back to DC again, you generate a couple times as much heat. And so round trip efficiency, when we include the inverter inefficiencies for an AC coupled system, is typically on the 85% range. Round trip efficiency for a DC coupled inverter, including the inverter's inefficiencies, which the majority of the inefficiency is at the inverter, is typically on the 92-94% range, right? And so we essentially lose twice as much energy when we're AC coupling. The other side of things, and yes, there are plenty of details, is that the batteries themselves can be very efficient, especially under slow discharge cycles. So battery efficiency, round trip battery efficiency on like a 5-hour charge and 5-hour discharge is typically 98%. So we're losing very little energy with the batteries. Most of the energy loss comes from the inverter. So if you invert twice for an AC coupled system, you lose almost twice as much energy there. So that's why we really, for battery energy storage, DC coupled is the way we believe to go. It's worth noting Tesla was AC coupled, and what if they switched to, Daniel?
DC coupled.
DC coupled LFP chemistry, which is what we're highlighting. And again, the meat of this talk is going to be talking about that connection between the grid and the inverter. For a microinverter system, it's a slightly different picture, but basically the same thing, that dollar symbol between the inverter and the grid. So Daniel, take it away from there.
Yeah, thank you. But really quickly, just to kind of finish off that thought, that's a great point, Nathan, is a lot of people think of the round trip battery efficiency in and out of the battery cells themselves, but think a little bit about the system inefficiencies and how you put the parts and pieces together. So as I was kind of going back and looking at some of these history of the net energy metering, really in a lot of ways, the idea that we can backfeed the grid isn't that far in the past, right? It was 1995 where really the first idea of the NEM 1.0 kind of came along, right? And it was a very aggressive net energy metering that tried to encourage private investment in renewables. And really what I'm showing here is kind of a system that you would see on a house, right? So here's the photovoltaic system. The photovoltaic powers in the daytime is first going to power any loads that are on at that moment. And then any excess power is going to be sent back out onto the grid. And that's what you see with this yellow line here. Send back out to the grid. At nighttime, when it's cloudy, when the photovoltaic panels aren't producing power, we're going to go ahead and consume power from the grid. Now, down here, the blue line is representing us consuming power from the grid. This green area here is representing the self-consumption of the loads coming from the photovoltaics. And then this yellow kind of hashed area here is us exporting to grid. Now, under NEM 1.0, Net Energy Metering 2.0, you had a one-to-one credit. So for every kilowatt hour you sent back out onto the grid, you would get 1 kilowatt hour credit. And in California, it was known as an annual true-up, or your true-up. So usually at the anniversary of the commissioning of your system, you would get a bill from either Pacific Gas and Electric or whatever utility it has. Ideally, if you, the installer, has sized the system properly, the homeowner would not owe the utility anything. And of course, the utility ideally wouldn't owe you anything. And so you kind of have that break even. Now,
so Daniel, I don't mean to stop you. I just want to make sure we're on the same page. We are monitoring energy, right? We are monitoring, you produce this many number of kilowatt hours over the course of a year, and you consume a certain number. Now, I did just talk to a place that has had net energy metering for years, and I know that they've been getting true up bills on the order of $1,000 the past couple of years. What's happened there? Have their rates gone up, or have they just started using more energy?
It could be definitely the going up started using more energy. Maybe they added a hot tub. Another thing to keep in mind is maybe the fixed charges have gone up. So the so-called solar tax has gone up as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a good answer. I think it's both. I mean, they did add some freezer capacities, or some freezers to have additional food capacity storage. And so they're using overall more energy. And that's an important point, because this is net energy metering, right? And this was what we had, and this is what a lot of people thought they, would have going forward, but it's changed recently. And so new installs were not any longer just looking at energy. And I think that's a big change.
Yeah. And what we've gone to is net billing tariff. So kind of the same graph you see here. I don't know why NREL put on 2 meters. Usually it's still just 1 meter. Again, photovoltaics will produce power, feed on any home loads that are on at that moment, send power back to the grid when excess generation is available. And then, of course, when you consume power, it comes back off of the grid. Same idea. We have here the blue, which is us consuming from the grid, green, which is us self-consumption, and then the yellow, which is us exporting to the grid. The difference now is you're not getting that one-to-one net energy metering, the credit in kilowatt hours. What now you're getting is what's known as the retail rate versus the sell rate. So when we're selling back to the grid, we're at a very low amount, right? The credit could be like a penny a kilowatt hour, and I have
it can be less than a penny a kilowatt hour, right? And that's what's so incredible.
Yeah, but of course, when you buy, it's not a penny a kilowatt hour. It's 20, 40, 50 cents a kilowatt hour. Go ahead.
41 Nathan. Is my base rate here in California. And just to point out the big difference here, with the previous one, and maybe my question wasn't great, but so net energy billing, if I produced 30 kilowatt hours and I bought 30 kilowatt hours, my bill would be very small, close to zero, right? Yes, there are some connection rates, but for the most part, very close to zero if I produce as much as I consume. In this case, I could produce 1,000 kilowatt hours in a month, use 500, and still get billed a large amount from the utility, because the amount they're paying me for the energy I'm generating is so small compared to the amount they're charging me. That, to your point earlier, means in order to make my system financial, have a return on investment for my solar system, I need a battery. I mean, I don't see any other way around it for me in California here. I need electricity at night. If I didn't, I could just self-consume what I'm producing. But I want electricity, I want access to electricity at night, early in the morning, or on a rainy day. And in order to be able to have that, I have to have some storage mechanism, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of also one of the reasons why I think when we're presenting these systems to homeowners is that we also don't negate the fact that these energy storage solutions not only can make these systems financially viable, but also provide resiliency, backup power as well. And so I get this a lot when I'm talking to generator dealers. What's the payback on a generator, a gas standby generator? There is none. The payback is the food not going bad in your freezer or your refrigerator. The payback is you having your lights on and keeping your home. So make sure when we're having these discussions with the homeowners that keep in mind that adding energy storage also provides that grid resiliency and gives you the backup. I don't want to get too far into it, but when we're sitting down at the kitchen table with the homeowners, how are we presenting these financial payback periods? It's becoming much more difficult. There's companies like Aurora, SunGage Financial, Open Solar that are trying to make sure that the proposals that they generate, which in turn we present to our homeowners, are accurate. And when there's a different price of electricity for every month, every day of the year, for every
Hours
hour,
even. Yep.
yeah, it's tough. And when you look down here, that sell rate essentially is at the sell rate is what the value of that energy would have been the moment you inject it to the grid had the utilities had to otherwise generate it themselves. A lot of things going on. And
And
so,
that
yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt again, but those sell rates that we're getting, Daniel, are based on what the utility says they would have charged or would have cost them for that energy. But it's not just to run their factory to produce the energy, right? It they are allowed to include administrative fees. They are allowed to include the necessity of putting in new generation capacity into those rates. And so we're essentially financing the utilities' future investments to meet the demand to produce that energy. So that's partly why that's how they can justify the buyback rates being as low as they are. Because essentially customers are using the utility as their battery, right? They
yeah,
sell it to the utility when solar is available, but the utility doesn't want it because there's plenty of solar. I mean, this past month I told you was, a record for California for 30 days, for the past 30 days. We've had enough generation from solar during the daytime to cover all the demand. And I mean, you're showing duck curves, and in
yeah.
2024, it's even worse.
Yeah, and that's exactly why the utility was able to convince the lawmakers is using some of those arguments. I would say that the utilities aren't crediting the sell rate of photovoltaics, giving them they're not giving the true value for what distributed energy resilience or distributed generation assets are, right? If I have a photovoltaic on my house and my neighbor doesn't, right? I'm not sending it halfway across the state. I'm feeding into their house. And also not to get into the fact that photovoltaics are a green source of energy generation, and they're not necessarily compensating us for that fact that the other generation sources are primarily natural gas, and what's that doing? So that's what the utility is going to say, right? The utility is going to say is that during the day in summer in California, that the price of electricity basically goes negative because of everybody who has photovoltaic panels on their house are backfeeding the grid. But what happens at nighttime, right? Where does all that electricity go? So they might say that they have to run peaker plants or run power plants idle and then ramp up those power plants at nighttime to support the grid. So you as a homeowner who's got solar, this is again maybe the utility's attitude is you're feeling good, you're driving your Tesla all around town, you come back home at night, you turn on the lights, you turn on the TV, you turn on you plug in the electric car. That energy isn't coming from solar, it's coming from the grid. So what we're trying to do, and I agree with the utilities conundrum here a little bit, that we need to be able to store that energy in batteries during the day and then discharge those energy storage assets at night to help support the grid. Now, I think that the method they did that by completely slashing the rates across the board was a little bit of a kneecap to the industry, and it should have been more of a gentle slope. So I acknowledge, that we need to have some more holistic approaches to intermittent generation during the day to then power our loads at night. But we did it in such a rate that really hindered the industry, and we're seeing a lot of companies going out of business. Another thing that the utilities will always say is that rich people got the advantage, right? Rich people were the people that were able to afford solar, go solar, at the cost of poor people that weren't able to afford solar at that moment. So that has been kind of disproven in a little bit of CALSA's, California Solar and Storage Association's literature that you can always dive into, and I'll show you a little bit here in a minute. But just at the time when this industry was growing, we did see a low to middle income homes starting to be able to afford photovoltaics and join the energy revolution. There was a lot of programs available through grants and other funding opportunities to put photovoltaics on low income housing, on apartment blocks as well. And we'll talk a little bit about virtual net metering. So kind of
So
what the
Daniel,
yes.
those are all good points, and I think that the curves that you're showing, the generation curves on the left in terms of megawatts, this duck curve in terms of how much the grid needs to provide during the day. I mean, this is all kind of valuable data. I think if you made a lot of good points there in terms of costs. I do also want to point out another one is that you can rent systems as well. Companies like Sunrun go out there and do install solar and do install batteries where you don't own the asset, but you pay them less than you would pay the utilities. And my neighbor has done that. To some extent, adding batteries to a system is a high cost investment, but there is a return on that investment. And even Enphase with AC coupled systems, it told me at the last RE Plus show that their return on investment when they added batteries didn't actually go up. They're expecting an 8-year return on investment. And so you can get that, but of course, California electricity is more expensive than many places in the country. So sorry, I think that these are valuable curves.
Yeah.
I hope everybody understands what we're showing on the screen here. But essentially, the utilities need to ramp up their production at nighttime in the morning and then drop it off during the day. And that is, for the utilities, not a very cost-effective way to use their resources. But of course, they're not charging us, 10 cents or 5 cents per kilowatt hour we buy during the daytime hours when they say they don't need the energy that our solar panels. They're taking energy from the producers, giving them pennies on the dollar, and sometimes, like Daniel's going to show you the rates here, but it's 0.1 cent per kilowatt hour, and they're turning around and selling that kilowatt hour for 40 to 50 cents. My rates in the summertime peak months go up to 54 cents base. So they're selling it to me at 54. They're buying it from Daniel at 0.1.
Yeah, and that's not even to get into the natural gas costs as well, and how you can, and this isn't necessarily a talk for that, but
They're
how
saving that cost, right?
Saving the gas, right? Your $200-300 natural gas bill. I mean, we all go to the gas station and see how expensive gas is. Well, natural gas is like that too. So as you electrify the home, you can see additional return on savings quicker as well if you think about getting rid of your gas bill as well. So kind of what's the other side of the utilities? Well, a lot of times is California is not an isolated state. There is a high voltage transmission lines that go to other states. For example, we could export some up to Oregon as well. Really, we are using more and more electricity every year, every day here in California, mainly because of our electrification and the removal of gas. So we need more generation, not less, right? And so with no solar payback, really what's happening is a lot of solar companies are going out of business. You would see historically when people get batteries, they also get solar. So you're not getting either of those. It's really in odds of the decarbonization, the clean energy goals that California is set out. And if you look at where we're at after and before this net energy metering change, we're not there to meet the goals anymore. Definitely low income people did have the opportunity now as well. And I think a big risk is other states around the country are looking carefully, other utilities, other governments are looking carefully at what California is doing and copying our model before those states have reached their solar saturation rates, which is what I mean by during the day, we're producing more energy than the grid needs with photovoltaics. So what we need is a balanced approach, not a solar cliff. This is kind of right off the California Public Utilities Commission website. The only thing that I kind of want to point out here is that, you know, we went from, again, from the export rate to now it's the price the utilities would have paid otherwise to generate that electricity. So credits for energy exports before the true up, right? Another one I kind of want to point out here is that we went from an annual true up billing to a monthly true up. Now you're still going to have an annual true up, but every month you're going to kind of see a piece of paper that's kind of prominent where you're at if you were to true up that month. Back in the day, a lot of times if I were to install photovoltaics on your home without a battery, say in the fall, you would be using a lot of energy in the home and your solar wouldn't be producing a lot. So if you actually looked at page 5 or 6 or 7 of your bill, and it shows you what your true up would be at that moment, you're going negative. You're going negative. You owe. Now, when summer comes around, you start to build those credits. So in a way, I kind of like that a little bit. Another one I kind of like down here, if there is anything to like about NEM 3.0, the net billing tariff, is now you can kind of add a little bit more solar to the system ahead of time in anticipation of adding loads in the future. One thing as I want to talk about
I
is,
want to make sure I
go ahead.
understood what you meant there, Daniel. You can oversize your solar array. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so let's read it. Customer's annual electric load plus up to 50% if customer attests to the need. So a lot of times I would always oversize arrays a little bit on my PG&E
And this is
systems.
for grid tied systems.
Yeah,
Obviously, everyone we're talking about grid tied. Off grid, you can build as big as you want. But
but the idea here is that the utilities didn't want you significantly oversizing your interconnected arrays than what the home's load currently was, because we don't need that extra generation. You don't want to be your own kind of power plant at your house, was the idea. Now, what that I'd always oversize it a little, and you could say 10%, and you can say something in your interconnection agreement that the home's loads are anticipated to increase because they're getting an electric water heater, because they're getting heat pumps, because they're getting an EV charger. Now with the new net billing tariff, you're allowed to do more than just 10%. In fact, it's saying 50%. Go ahead and oversize the arrays in anticipation that their home's gas loads are going to be moved over, or maybe they're going to get
to electric.
a hot tub as well.
That's a good example. And Daniel, let's call your attention to the questions here. Todd asks, can we get a quick generic BE example 2.0 versus 3.0 with storage?
I'm sorry, a BE?
Yeah, I wasn't understanding that either. So I'm not sure if we're talking about battery energy storage, 2.0 versus 3.0, maybe having batteries. Todd, if you want to clarify,
Maybe benefits, expenses, maybe.
Okay.
One thing I want to say, and I kind of hinted at this, is it's hard to model these new kind of net billing tariffs. And again, I of course, people want to return on money, but also don't forget the fact that energy storage systems provide grid resiliency to the home. Go
Break
ahead,
even.
Nathan.
Break even.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I think that's a great question, Todd. I think that we would have to spend some time showing exactly what break even looks like. For example, return on your investment. If you put a small photovoltaic system on your roof, you could self-consume all of that solar that you're producing. Of course, it becomes more cost effective to build a larger solar system because you're already on the roof. It doesn't take twice as much money to add twice as many panels. And that's where we get into the sticky point where, okay, now since I'm not self-consuming all that power, I need to either store it or sell it back to the grid. And so for very small systems, this isn't a major consideration, but most of us want to produce the energy we need with our solar panels. And to do that, we're either going to have to save the extra, use it in the evening, as Daniel's earlier graphs were showing, or sell the extra to the grid, hope they give us a fair return for that sale, and then buy the excess from them. So thanks for clarifying. I think that maybe we could put some time into having a decent slide showing a couple examples of
Yeah.
systems, and Daniel is going to talk about that in the future here. I know we're halfway into this call already. Thomas asks, at 41 cents per kilowatt hour for utility rates, would it be cost effective for me to run my generator each evening to avoid those high charges? I think that you're in about in the ballpark of what it costs for the fuel on your generator, Thomas. The downside to running your generator, of course, is lifetime of your generator, wearable parts, increased maintenance costs. And so I do still think that they're just below that. I can tell you that I have thought of taking my shop where, I pay more attention to these rates completely off grid and not having utility service just by using batteries. Because I don't use that much overall energy, but I still get almost a minimum, monthly charge on this, and I am trying to run more out of batteries. But I need to get more solar up on my roof. So
Yeah, and I get that question a lot. At what point does the kilowatt hour have to cost for me to run a generator? Nathan, given that we're kind of coming
yeah,
up on the halfway point, I'm going to kind of move along pretty quick here and just get us through. One thing is really quickly on this slide is that the idea of net energy metering and how it should function and work is not a new topic. I went back to some old home power magazines, 1995, which is when NEM 1.0 came into effect, and 2017, which is when NEM 2.0 came into effect. And you can see kind of in these articles that we were thinking about it then, and it's not a topic that's gone away. Again, you can read the kind of snippets there, but really a lot of ways the industry feels under attack. And how are these PV systems going to function? What I'm showing you here is, again, the red is us buying from grid. The green is us
selling to grid.
the production, right? And then here is this blue is our self-consumption. So the
Okay.
idea here is that if the red isn't, we're not getting anything from the red. If we're getting charged a lot from the red, and we're not getting paid anything from the green, we need to shift the green into the red. And how do we do that? We do it with power. Understand that there's also seasonal variations in that argument. Here's that graph I was talking about. Now, I got this off of California Solar and Storage Association's website. They are out there lobbying lawmakers to understand what these changes are and kind of soften the impact a lot of this. So if you haven't joined this organization, I really encourage you to. Sequoia Cross, our boss, is on the board. But if you're not in California, there's other versions of this kind of organization, a trade organization, I'm sure in your state. Look into them. And so what we're looking at is kind of this heat map. And as you can see, we're on April 18th right now, and we're coming up on 11 a.m.
So let's
Pacific.
be clear from the start, Daniel. These are not the rates that we're getting charged. These are the rates, the compensation rates for buying electricity from you if you've overproduced.
Exactly.
And you can see of course, in the middle, vertically, that would be the times of day, from about 9 a.m. to 6 p.m., depending on what month of the year it is, right? Where you would be selling your excess electricity back to the grid. And notice those numbers. I told you my base rate out here, I'm paying 41 cents and up in the summer. And look what they're buying back. I mean, Daniel's got it. It's highlighted in red here, but
Yeah.
in some cases, it's less than a cent.
Yeah, and you, Nathan, had mentioned also that we have throughout the last month, I believe, been generating more than we use, and so it kind of makes sense why these are red right here as well, right? Air conditioning
Sure.
loads haven't come up a little bit throughout the state. Everybody's eyes always come over to these green kind of blocks over here. So you absolutely can discharge the battery to grid if it's charged by photovoltaics. And I really expect a lot of homeowners to be dumping their battery into the grid at
I
that
think
point.
they put those two green numbers on there, Daniel, so that they could claim that, hey, look, in some cases, we're paying $3 per kilowatt hour
Yeah.
back to you.
And yeah,
Yeah,
little smoke and mirrors.
during 1 hour of 1 month
Yeah.
of the year.
If you want to look at some of these, again, the member-only resources page is available when you become part of this organization. You can read the agreement yourself right there if you like. Another kind of idea, and this was kind of out of Aurora. Now, there's no necessarily batteries on this, is the idea that you can produce, you want your solar to produce power later into the day. So what this dashed blue line here is a home's typical consumption, right? How much energy you're consuming in the home. So everybody's asleep at night. Everybody kind of wakes up in the morning, consumes power in the morning. Then everybody goes off to school and work. And then in the evening, you're starting to consume power, and then it kind of drops off. So the idea here is that this blue kind of here is us sending back to grid. The dark blue is us self-consuming. And then here, this kind of peach or color is us consuming self-consumption during peak hours. So the idea here is that you actually get more money, more value for doing self-consumption, and there's even a little bit of sliver here that you're self-consuming, exporting during peak use. This is actually worth more to you than it would be to actually export during the day.
So how do we get that?
So how we get that is we produce power using photovoltaics later into the afternoon. How we do that here in the northern hemisphere, the sun sets in the west. We're going to shift our arrays, maybe not completely west, but definitely southwest. So again, what we're seeing here is the consumption curve. What we did is we shifted the production curve to be later into the afternoon. So we're self-consuming on those later into the evening, avoiding having to buy power later into the evening, capturing this last rays of sun in the evening as we're home making dinner and the like. So
Daniel, we got a question from Jeremy, and Jeremy, thanks for being on with us. I think Oak Electric, right? And he's asking, how do you discharge the battery to the grid with a Simplify inverter and battery?
Well, you would use a solar arc in that example. I believe there is capabilities to program those inverters to discharge to the grid. I know absolutely there's capabilities of programming to the to support the home's loads. Now,
yeah, so
go ahead.
I'll take that if you don't mind, Daniel, because I think I'm a little more familiar with Energy Track. Jeremy, I don't think we have the ability yet in Energy Track to discharge our inverter from battery to grid. The inverter absolutely has that capability, but I don't think our software offers it yet. Daniel's point, that you can do this with a Solarc. Absolutely, you can program that into the Solarc, and I think I'll have to say it's a feature that will be coming to the Simplify inverter.
Yeah, and I do want to be careful from the way I understand it, and that you can only discharge energy from grid that's been captured from photovoltaic. So you absolutely can discharge a battery to the home load when the battery has been charged by the grid. But to export it to grid, it has to come from clean energy source.
Yeah, so Daniel's saying to follow regulations, if you want to discharge the battery to grid, you should have not charged that battery from the grid. So for instance, arbitration, you cannot just charge the battery from the grid when
buy low, sell high.
Yeah, and then sell it back to the grid when the rates are more favorable to you. Of course, under NEM 3.0, that would be 2 hours out of September. But his point is, how you can do that and following rules. You, Jeremy, I believe, were asking how you can do that, electronically, and certainly, the inverter would have to follow the regulations, and you would set that up with the software. We know we have it with the Solarc, and I think we're not quite there yet with the Simplify Energy Track setup. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, another way to kind of increase your savings, this is without batteries at all, potentially, is, remember I showed you kind of the home's kind of load, consumption load, and I remember I showed you the production. Well, what we can do is using load shedding devices like Span, like Lumen, you can actually, instead of shifting the production curve to later in the day, you can actually shift your load curve. So for example, maybe we have an electric hot water heater, and we program the electric hot water heater to generate hot water during the day when the sun is up and you have a lot of excess generation, and then shut the electric water heater down when the evening time comes along, knowing that you have a well-insulated electric water tank that's going to be able to keep its hot water. Of course, if you got a lot of hot water, of course, you can always change that maybe through other programming. But the idea that you shift the production or you adjust the consumption profile of your home to save money and maximize it. Another thing off of CalSA, these are a couple Q&As. So say you have a house, you go to sell your house, and your house has a system that's under NEM 1 or NEM 2. The new owners who buy your house, do they get to keep the NEM 1 2.0? Do they get switched over to NEM 3? No, they don't get switched over. They're just going to basically inherit however, I don't know if I said that right, inherit how many ever years are left on that agreement. Can you add a battery? Say you got a NEM 2.0 solar system. Can you add a battery to that system and get yourself resiliency? Absolutely, you can. You can add it to either NEM 1.0 or NEM 2.0. This is another one. It's a little more nuanced here, but say you got a NEM 2.0 system. Say you have an 8,000 watt inverter and you got 8,000 watts of solar. You can actually add solar to that system and stay on that existing NEM 2.0 or 1.0 agreement. Why? Because the AC rating of the inverter isn't going to change, right? You're never going to send any more than 8,000 watts back to the grid at any time. But by adding solar, you're going to produce power earlier and later into the day. So
What do you
absolutely,
mean by that, Daniel? So we've got an inverter that we're adding solar panels to, but you just said we're not producing any extra energy. So just to be clear,
well, I guess what I'm saying is we're not producing, we're not going to send any more power out to the grid. We are going to produce more energy. Thanks for asking me to clarify that, Nathan. We are going to be producing more energy. It's just that we're never going to be sending any more power back to the grid. So by having
so
more
we're
energy produced, we're going to be able to self-consume ourselves a little bit later into the
and
afternoon and earlier in
in
the
many
morning.
cases, right, it does make sense to oversize your array so that yes, you get some clipping,
Mhm.
right? Meaning the inverter can't produce all the energy that the solar panels could, right? But now we saturate that inverter's ability earlier in the day, and we carry a larger amount of power later into the evening. So essentially, you're meeting more of your loads. You're not draining your battery as early because you've got an oversized array on there.
Yeah, and I would get that. A lot of people, when they first get the photovoltaic array, of course, they're always looking at their app and they'd see these flat spots during the day. I'd have to explain the concept of inverter clipping and why actually some inverter clipping is appropriate and is acceptable and is a common practice in our industry.
And let me say one other thing on that topic, Daniel. I know we're jumping. I know you're eager to keep going. The other thing to say is, a lot of people will buy a 5,000 watt inverter and put in a 5,000 watt solar array. Most, I've got a 5,000 watt solar array or 5,200 watts. I've never exceeded 4,500 watts on mine. You would only get that if you were at the perfect orientation, the perfect temperature,
Cold
at the
morning.
perfect time of day, right? And so, if you're buying a 5,000 watt inverter, you can put in 7,000 watts of solar. Yes, you'll get some clipping under peak times, but ultimately, you'll probably have a better overall sized
Yeah.
system.
And at some point that, of course, 10,000 or 15,000 watts isn't necessarily appropriate.
Right.
Another thing that's been under attack, and again, I'm going to kind of go a little quick on here, is virtual net metering. The idea that you have one property with multiple meters on that property, and it doesn't really make sense to split up the photovoltaic arrays all over the property and have buried conduit. You want to put it on one structure, 1 meter, and then virtually apply those credits from that 1 meter and apply it to other meters on the property. So this not only applies to say one parcel, but it can become other parcels, distributed assets, even in community solars as well. So this is another thing that's been under attack by California Public Utilities Commission. So again, how these rules work matters, and just understand that there's organizations like the CalSA out there that are looking to keep these virtual net metering programs in place, which is really crucial for schools, for churches, for low-income housing developments that have multiple meters, and you're not going to take 3 panels here and feed it to that meter, 3 panels there and feed it into this meter, right? You're going to have a large array feeding 1 meter and then distribute those credits appropriately. This came out of Josh Brum out of Solagent, kind of helped me out with this. We did a talk a while ago. Is when we are talking about net energy metering 3.0 with customers, is try to figure out what bucket they're going to be in. And bucket number 1 essentially is somebody who only wants to see a financial return on their system, and they don't really have a lot of outages. So bucket number 1, and I had really not kind of given this any credence before, but the idea is that you put solar on someone's house, you put a battery on someone's house, but there's no backup, right? So if the grid goes down, the whole system goes down. And so why you might do that is you can get the installation costs down, right? If you get the installation costs down, they're going to get a faster ROI on that. And because it's a faster installation. Why? Because you're not having to do a backed up loads panel. You're not, maybe can get rid of some of the other switches and of the like. You're not having to pull circuits over to a different, like I said, that backed up loads panel.
So Daniel,
Yeah,
just so I understand, you're saying there's no backup, but there's a battery, and that's because everything just stays in the main loads panel, and you're just exporting all your energy to your main panel. And then
during the night.
of course, that would mean that in order to back up any loads in the main panel, you'd have to be exporting to grid. So there
Yeah.
is no backup. There's simply a battery, an inverter, and the loads stay in the main loads panel. Save
Yeah,
cost.
yeah, exactly. And I do acknowledge that might be a situation, but a lot of times if we're already out there, we're already doing the work, we already got the solar, the battery, it doesn't cost that much more to actually pull some loads over to the backed up loads panel. That's where bucket two is going to come in.
Okay. I mean, bucket number one sounds like SolarEdge to me, right? You don't get battery backup with that SolarEdge inverter because it's only set up as a grid tied inverter. Though you could add a battery to it.
Yeah, and again, you could potentially add a backed up loads panel, and that's where it would move you into bucket number two. Bucket number
Okay.
two is somebody who wants to see a financial return, but also wants that backup power. And so that's what we're going to do is we're going to back up partial home, right? We're going to have a battery there that's going to be able to provide power to the home when it's really expensive to buy. We're gonna have a battery there that's gonna be able to charge up with solar when otherwise the solar would have been paid almost nothing to send it back to grid. Again, that's, I think, a lot of cases we're gonna be. There is, of course, the bucket number three. This is the kind of I hate the utility person that's gonna want whole home backup. They're gonna want a large, expensive system where kind of I see the Solar 15K coming into play with that 200 amp pass through paired with our new 6.6 battery. It's going to give them the whole home backup, give them the ability to not buy or sell power to the grid as much as possible. We talked a little bit about this, is how converting gas loads over to electric loads is going to increase your ROI because of natural gas pricing as well. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of how you would look at some of this stuff. What we're looking at here is our 6 kilowatt Briggs Stratton inverter. We have grid. We have our non-backed up loads, meter main. We got some photovoltaics with the AP Smart Rapid Shutdown. We do have an AP Smart Rapid Shutdown transmitter built into our inverter. So in this example, basically, we're just going to try and use the inverter to power the home loads when it's expensive to buy from the home. Additionally, we could also do a system where this system, grid tied zero export, is really doing everything in its power to never import power and never export power. Of course, during winter, during a long storm, the photovoltaic system isn't going to be able to keep those battery charged. So there is going to be instances where you may have to buy power from the grid as well. This is kind of that bucket number three person that I was showing a little bit here. We have grid, a meter can, meter service disconnect, feeding into the SolarX, all 200 amps. 200 amps is flowing right back out to the backed up loads panel. In this example, we're using Tigo, and we have some of our Boss 12 cabinets here with a SolarX and our inverter. Both has 2-wire signal to start, so we can start up a generator, run a generator to charge up the batteries
And
as well.
just quick correction here. To the main panel, right? There is no backed up loads here with this whole home backup.
Well, the main panel is the backed up loads, right? The whole home backed up. But thank you. Yeah, make sure we're on the same page, Nathan.
And I would like to recommend, some of our 6.6 battery stacks as well, which are great with the SolarX and just like the Amplifies have.
Yeah. And if you look at here, these have been a great workhorse. This Boss cabinets with these bus bars and the combiner. With the new 6.6 battery, we're eliminating a lot of those bus bars, those combiners, and simplifying the install and bringing the price point down really to be competitive. So here's some of our product line offering. I do want to highlight a little bit Energy Track. Energy Track is our software programming that Nathan had alluded to earlier. And I do want to mention is when we're talking about these load shed, these modeling programmings, the apps that the homeowners use, the app that the installers use, this software is becoming more and more important in this industry every day. And I'm really excited that our Energy Track team is going to be out there developing those new products and offerings. We have an in-house team out in Milwaukee, and all of our servers are housed in the United States. That
So
is that outdoor.
Daniel,
Yeah,
I know we're short on time and we probably won't get through all your slides, but we did have somebody ask anonymously, hey, I want to totally disconnect from the grid, but the local fire marshal limits me to 20 kilowatt hours of lithium battery. How common is this situation? I'll respond to that if you
yeah.
don't mind. The first is that individual stacks of batteries, unless they have built-in fire suppression, are limited to 20 kilowatt hours. Most jurisdictions, you can put in more than one stack. So for inside your garage, you're allowed up to two 20 kilowatt hour stacks. Now, you might have a local AHJ or a local fire marshal that's not following the NEC guidelines. But those NECA and NFPA, National Fire Protection Authority guidelines, allow two stacks in garages. So unless they're differing from the national recommendations, you should be able to get 40, not just 20. And I'm with you on wanting to disconnect from the grid. Although there are times where having that grid connection is quite useful. So hopefully that helps. And outdoors, I think you're limited to 4 20 kilowatt hour stacks or 80 kilowatt hours, so that you've got options if you can go outdoors. And if you're in a cold location, there are options for heated battery cabinets from us. And then you could, of course, have a utility shed as well that's not connected to your residence. So there are some ways you could get around that by using the NFPA 855.
Yeah, buy a copy of it and sit down there with the fire marshal or the inspector and
Or
help
send us an
educate them.
email afterwards and
Yeah,
we'll try to help
we'll
you
have
out.
a conference call. But again, I think that's a good point, Nathan, is that a lot of times the buck stops at the fire marshal or the inspector, and they make the final say, no matter how much materials you present to them or educate them. So we're happy to help to push them over as well. If we're doing outdoor systems, BOSS 12, BOSS 6, these are the ones that are available with the heating systems. We have other talks where we talk about cold weather applications. Additionally, we can put an inverter up top as well and 6 batteries on the bottom. Make sure when we're doing that bucket number 3 and we're doing that Solar 15K that we have enough batteries there to support the power requirements that the Solar 15K may be called upon. And one nice thing about our stack of 3 6.6 kilowatt hours is that it comes just under that 20 kilowatt hour NFPA threshold. So you can install this with the 1C discharge rate on these batteries. It can provide enough power to provide a solar that what it needs if it's called upon to have full output, right? If it needs to start a motor, like an inductive load or something like that. The cycle life is a little bit less on these batteries, but keep in mind, 365 days a year and cycling it, you can get a decades potentially of cycle life of these batteries as well.
Yeah, Daniel, and I would point out here that this is at 0.75 C, which means an hour and 20-minute discharge. So these tests were run very quickly, and that's why there's that plus there. If you run them at typical more 5-hour charge discharge cycles, again, we expect more. But we've rated this battery to 0.75 C for high power demands. That gives us 14 kilowatts of output out of a single 20 kilowatt hour stack. So we have a lot more usable power output for those surges, for those times when, you mentioned the word hot tub, but for that time where you turn the hot tub on, but somebody's also got that kitchen range, the electric range on, something like that.
Yeah, we don't expect somebody to discharge their batteries in 1 hour or 0.75 hours. It's possible, but why fast
you can do it. You can do it, but you're not normally going to do that under most applications.
But it's important to have that capability for those moments that you need to be able to surge. So we have them in different stacks here as well. And you can combine the stacks together. If you could do 2 stacks together, you can actually feed them into a Solar 15K without the need of a combiner or a breaker.
Absolutely.
And if you have 4 or more, then of course we have to probably pull in a midnight solar combiner or something as well.
Yeah, so the nice thing about that 15K there that you were showing is that they have dual breakers in there, so you can use the inverter as a combiner for up to 2 stacks. And of course, if you're doing more than 2 stacks, you will need a combiner with individual breakers on each of your wire runs.
I'm excited. The 6.6 is not only stacking where the energy stacks and the communication stacks. It's floor mount, it's wall mountable. So if you get it up off the floor, you can avoid a parking bollard. But it's the price point. I'm really excited to be able to offer a really competitive pricing, really fast install with that same safe, reliable, long-lasting chemistry as well. That's a picture of the stacking right there. And showing a little bit how the communications will work. And we're going to have additional trainings where we dive a lot more deeper into some of these topics as well. We make generators. Absolutely, we make generators. We're kind of running out of time, so I don't want to rush us at the end, but these are
Well,
natural.
Daniel,
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we're there at the end, and we've got. I think the questions for you and I are about the most important part of these talks. We want people to be able to ask the questions. Karen asks, "I'm curious about the 3 customer scenarios under NEM 3.0. Basically, if the return on investment focus if I am the return on investment focused person, would it be better off exporting my stored up energy during the few hours of the year, like the months of August, September that we showed?" And then trying to do self-consumption the rest of the year.
Yes. Yes. So get into the programming right on the day before and put it into a kind of a storm watch mode or say, hey, I want you to store everything. I don't want you to do kind of arbitrage, energy arbitrage the day before, and then dump it to the grid.
Yeah, August and September, 6 p.m., 7 p.m., when it's 75 cents to $3 per kilowatt hour, discharge your 20 kilowatt hour battery into the grid and try to get some return on investment there. Certainly can do that. They're expecting most customers won't, which is probably why they landed so high at $3 per kilowatt hour there. Michael asks, what's the landed cost for a bucket 3 option? And Michael, the answer for that is it really depends entirely on the customer. However, I will say that the industry is moving towards whole home backup. And we love our 15K option, which is why our new battery is designed specifically for that 15K bucket, that third bucket with the 15K. You back up the entire home. Now, if you're backing up the entire home, that means if that sump pump kicks on, or if those circuits you don't really need that are running in the garage kick on, you get less backup time overall because you're backing up the entire home. But it's certainly easier for the installers, and it's certainly what most customers want. Overall cost of doing something like this, you can get in under 25K for a small home like mine. You can get in with 20 plus kilowatt hours of battery energy storage, a SolarArc 15K, and a solar array, and your equipment wise, you're around 20 grand. So typically, though, those costs are going to be pushing the 50 kilowatt, or $50,000 range for most whole homes. I have a small home, and I do a lot of the work myself. I think for an installer doing a whole home backup, you're probably at about a 40K start point, and going up to 60K if you're adding a few battery stacks, etc. Daniel, I don't know if you would agree with this. I know you just had a conversation recently on pricing for these kind of things.
No, yeah, it's not far off. Really quickly before I answer that, though, if you need NAPSUP credits and you got to jump because you got something else, thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. Email energy storage training at Basco, Briggs and Stratton Company.com, spelled out Basco, for your credits. And please stick around for a few more minutes as we finish up some of these questions. I really love the SolarArc 15K as well, Nathan, and I really like the pairing with our battery. But additionally, I also really like our 6K inverter. And the reason I can like both of them is because they're really not the same product, right? A SolarArc 15K is whole home backup, large power capabilities. Our 6K inverter is partial home backup. It's still going to be able to support the home loads during the day, but it's much lower price point. So landed cost is definitely matters.
And that's bucket 2, right? And that's we're much more affordable than bucket number 2. And I think Josh's point in that talk that you gave together, Daniel, was that bucket number 2 is where the majority of the customers ultimately land after they get that, the pricing for bucket number 3.
Yeah.
And you don't really need to back up everything, right? If grid's down, do you really need your electric dryer? Are you doing laundry? So
Got a clothesline. Any other questions, Nathan?
not we've got one last one coming in. Anonymous here says, answering our questions was definitely the best part of the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, and again, I want to also reiterate that other question about the return on investment or the payback period. Again, so we're relying on modeling companies like Aurora, like Open Solar. So if we start to have a model of our house and we put the solar panels on the west side versus the south side, we change this battery scheme is what they call it, and we change the behavior on how the battery operates. Does it just sit there waiting for an outage? Does it discharge all the way down? Does it discharge to 20% and we have a battery reserve level? What does it look like for the rate changes? So it's becoming more difficult, and I'm really applaud some of these open solars, the Auroras, the Energy Sage, the PV Watts, for being able to model these things, because there's so many more variables now that we've entered this new net billing tariff, it's really hard with confidence to be able to model these things for the next 10, 15 years that you might expect for a payback on something like this system. Nathan, any final questions?
That is it. And well, actually, Peter says, can I get a copy of the PowerPoint? So for everyone, yes, we'll be sending out a copy of the PowerPoint slides. We'll also be sending out an email with a link to the recording. And you'll get one more that's talking about upcoming trainings. Sorry, all in one email, but you'll get links to upcoming trainings as well. So that will be coming to everyone who's registered for this talk. And additionally, one more time, if you're here for the NABCEP credits, need those continuing education credits, energy storage training at basco.com. Daniel, thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.